Hey, everyone, and welcome to a deep dive into how to think.
Yeah.
And we're not going to lecture you or anything like that.
No, no, no.
We're just exploring key ideas from this fascinating document
hmm
that we found. And we want to help you think better.
Yeah, think of it as like giving your brain a little upgrade.
Yeah, like a mental toolkit upgrade.
Exactly. And this document that we're looking at,
Oh, this is so cool.
it's called How to Think Pillars of Thought.
Oh, I like it.
It's really neat because it doesn't like tell you what to think, right?
Right.
It shows you how to think, which I think is way more valuable.
I agree with that.
And it does it by building on these pillars of culture, science, and philosophy.
Okay, so I'm already intrigued. So we got these three pillars, right? Culture, science, philosophy.
Yeah.
How do they help us think better? I mean, are they like separate things or do they kind of work together?
That's a great question. And the document actually emphasizes that they are not isolated at all. They're interconnected. Imagine them like a foundation for lifelong learning.
Oh, I like that. So it's like we're building a mental framework, right?
Yeah.
Using these pillars to kind of see the world more clearly.
Exactly. And the document even talks about using something called the Pareto principle. Have you heard of that?
The Pareto principle, is that like the 80-20 rule?
You got it.
80-20.
Okay, so remind me, what's that about again?
Basically, it means you get the most impact for your effort by focusing on the 20% that really matters. Instead of trying to learn everything about everything, you find that 20% that gives you like 80% of the value.
Okay, I love that. It's like finding those hidden gems, right? The stuff that really unlocks a whole new level of understanding.
Right.
But before we dive into those pillars and the 80-20 rule, I think we need to talk about this whole idea of like lifelong learning. I think a lot of us feel like, we need to know everything, you know?
Yeah.
Be an expert in like every single field.
Absolutely. And the source really hits on this point. It emphasizes that, knowledge is constantly evolving, right?
So it's more about staying curious and adaptable rather than reaching some impossible finish line.
Okay, so it's about the journey, not the destination.
Exactly.
I love that. Takes the pressure off, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Instead of feeling like we need to cram our brains with every single fact, it's more about cultivating this mindset of, always learning, always growing.
Yeah, be a lifelong learner.
Love it. Okay, so let's bring in that 80-20 rule you were talking about.
Mhm.
How does that apply to each of these pillars?
Okay, so think back to that time you crammed for an exam, right? And you only remembered a few key points.
Oh, yeah. Every time.
That's Pareto in action.
Okay.
Now imagine finding those key points in, say, history, science, or philosophy. It's about prioritizing for maximum impact.
Okay, I'm with you. Give me an example, though.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm fascinated by history, but it's so much information.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It's overwhelming. Where do I even start? What's that crucial 20% I should focus on?
So in history, that 20% might be understanding like key historical events, like revolutions or pivotal inventions. Think about the printing press.
Oh, yeah. Changed everything.
Right. It totally revolutionized communication. Or, the discovery of penicillin transformed medicine. These events have like a ripple effect throughout history. They impact everything that comes after.
So instead of getting lost in like every battle and every king,
Yeah.
I can focus on the events that, really shaped the world.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. What about science? How does the 80-20 rule apply there? Because science is huge.
So with science, think about the scientific method itself.
Okay.
That's your 20%. Understanding how scientists form hypotheses, design experiments, analyze data, and draw conclusions, that process, that's the key to unlocking so much of scientific knowledge.
So instead of trying to memorize every single scientific fact, I should focus on understanding how science works.
Yeah.
And then I can apply that process to any scientific topic that interests me.
Right. Absolutely. It's like having a master key that opens up this whole world of scientific understanding.
Oh, I like that. So we're not just getting the fish, we're learning how to fish.
There you go.
Okay, I like it. Okay, so we've covered culture, science. What about philosophy? What's the 20% there that kind of unlocks that pillar?
So with philosophy, it's about exploring the frameworks for logic, ethics, and meaning.
Okay.
And you can think of these as like lenses through which you can view and analyze the world. For example, studying logic can help you identify fallacies and arguments.
Oh, that's so useful.
Right, incredibly useful in today's world, don't you think?
Oh my gosh, yes. We are bombarded with information.
Exactly.
So it's like philosophy gives us these mental tools, right?
Yeah.
To dissect arguments, evaluate information, form our own opinions.
Exactly. You're not just accepting what you're told, but you're developing the skills to really critically analyze information and arrive at your own conclusions.
This whole 80-20 rule is making learning feel so much more, I don't know, approachable, less overwhelming. But, and I think a lot of the listeners might relate to this. What about perfectionism?
Oh.
It can really sabotage the learning process, can it?
You're absolutely right. And the document actually calls out perfectionism as a major roadblock.
Mm-hmm.
This constant striving to be flawless can actually hold you back from taking risks, exploring new ideas. Think about the Wright brothers.
Oh, good example.
If they'd been paralyzed by perfectionism, would they have ever dared to, try to fly?
I mean, they probably crashed a bunch of times before they got it
They
right.
got it right. Right.
What if they were too afraid of failing? They never would have even started.
Exactly. And that's the problem with perfectionism, right? It sets this unrealistic expectation that we need to know everything perfectly from the get-go. But that's just not how learning works.
Mm-hmm.
It's about embracing those mistakes as stepping stones, not as failures.
Okay, so how do we break free from that perfectionism trap? Because it's easy to say don't be a perfectionist,
Yeah.
but it's harder to actually shift that mindset.
Yeah, and the document gives us some tips. It starts with cultivating what's called a growth mindset.
Okay.
Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about getting better. So instead of saying, I'm terrible at this, try saying, I'm learning and I'll get better with practice.
Okay, I like that. So it's like I'm on the journey.
Exactly.
I'm not at the destination yet.
Yeah. And celebrate those small wins, right? Those little moments of progress, because they all add up over time.
So we've talked about lifelong learning, the power of the 80-20 rule, the dangers of perfectionism. But how does all of this tie back to those pillars? Culture, science, philosophy.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. It's not just about studying these pillars in isolation. It's about understanding how they're interconnected. The document uses this brilliant analogy. It says, culture gives you context, science gives you the tools, and philosophy helps you interpret the meaning.
Okay, I'm liking this analogy. So
Yeah.
unpack that a little bit. How does culture give us context?
Well, think about it. Culture encompasses everything from our history, our art, our values, our beliefs. It gives us this framework for understanding human behavior, social dynamics. It helps us see where we come from and how we got here.
So the culture provides the backdrop, right, for everything else.
Yeah, it sets the stage.
Okay, so how does science fit into this picture then?
And then science is like, well, it equips us with the tools, right?
Okay.
To investigate that world that's been shaped by culture. Think
Yeah.
about it. Observation, experimentation, analysis, that's the scientific method.
Yeah.
It lets us test hypotheses, gather evidence, draw conclusions, all about the world around us.
So science gives us that methodology, right, to actually explore these questions that culture raises. Okay, but where does philosophy fit in? Because honestly, philosophy sometimes feels a little, I don't know, abstract.
I get that. People think it's just like dusty old books and, guys with beards debating what's the meaning of life.
Yeah.
But it's actually way more practical than that.
Okay.
It helps us interpret what we've learned, like grapple with the big questions, meaning ethics, the nature of reality itself, heavy stuff.
Can you give me a real world example? How does philosophy actually help us understand, the world around us?
Let's say you're fascinated by artificial intelligence. That's a hot topic right now.
Yeah, super hot.
Culture, that might give you context about, the history of technology and how it's impacted society. Science gives you the tools to actually understand how do AI algorithms even work. But then philosophy steps in, right? And it's like, hold on, what are the ethical implications of creating machines that can, think for themselves? What does it mean for humanity if we've got machines that are more intelligent than us?
Whoa.
Those are the philosophical questions that science can't answer alone.
Yeah, those are big questions.
Right.
So it's like philosophy helps us connect the dots, between those facts and figures that we get from science and those bigger questions about who we are, where we're going.
Exactly. And remember how we talked about perfectionism earlier?
Yeah.
It applies here, too. You might be tempted to, shy away from those big philosophical questions because there are no easy answers.
Right.
But honestly, that's where the real learning happens. When you're willing to grapple with that complexity, with that uncertainty.
So it's like philosophy is encouraging us to embrace the unknown, be comfortable with ambiguity, which is probably a good life skill in general, wouldn't you say?
Totally. And that ties back to lifelong learning, right? Knowledge isn't static. It's always evolving, just like we are. The world throws new curveballs at us all the time. Having that philosophical foundation, it helps us navigate those complexities with more clarity, with more purpose.
I'm really starting to see how these pillars work together. It's not just about studying them in isolation. It's about understanding how they intersect, they reinforce each other. It's like we're weaving a tapestry of knowledge. Each thread is a different perspective.
And the document actually talks about this. It says these interconnected pillars actually help us make sense of the world with more empathy. Imagine that. You understand different cultures, you apply those scientific principles to problems, and you use philosophical frameworks to navigate ethical dilemmas. It's a powerful combo.
This deep dive it's really shifting my perspective on learning. It's not about memorizing facts. It's about developing a way of thinking that helps me engage with the world in a more meaningful way.
And remember, this is just the start of the journey, right? As you continue to explore these pillars, you're going to start seeing connections you never noticed before. You'll start to question assumptions, challenge your own beliefs, and you develop a deeper understanding of yourself and the world.
I feel like this has been such a thought-provoking deep dive already. It feels like I have like a whole new framework for how to approach learning. And before we let our listeners go off and like ponder all of this, the document ends with a really interesting question.
Yeah. It asks, how might you use that Pareto principle, that 80-20 rule, to enhance your learning in one of those pillars? Like, what's the 20% of knowledge that would have the biggest impact in something you're interested in?
Oh, that's a great question to leave our listeners with. It's like it challenges each of us to think about, our own personal learning journey and identify those key concepts.
It's an invitation to apply everything we've been talking about, those pillars, the 80-20 rule, to see where they lead us.
This deep dive has given me so much to think about. It's not about being perfect. It's about being curious, embracing the messiness of learning, focusing on those high-impact concepts. But most importantly, it's remembering that learning is a journey, not a destination. And it's a journey we take together.
It's been awesome diving into this stuff with you. I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to continue their own explorations. So until next time, keep those minds curious, keep those perspectives open, and keep on diving deep.
I was just thinking about something you mentioned earlier about how philosophy helps us kind of deal with the unknown.
Yeah.
And isn't that really like the essence of what we're doing here today?
Yeah.
Exploring these pillars of thought. We're venturing into the unknown.
Right.
Embracing the messiness of it all.
Yeah.
And just trusting the process.
I love that. It's like we're practicing what we preach. Right. And remember, embracing the unknown doesn't mean we're totally lost.
Right.
It means we're open to new discoveries, new connections.
New ways of seeing things.
Exactly.
It reminds me of that quote, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's not about having all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
It's about having the curiosity to keep asking the questions.
And the humility to accept that, what we understand is always changing. That's what I think makes lifelong learning so exciting. It's not about like this final destination. It's that constant exploration, the joy of discovering new things.
It's about staying curious, staying engaged, using those pillars of thought, culture, science, philosophy as, like lenses.
Yeah.
To look at the world through. They're not just these abstract concepts.
Yeah.
They're tools that we can actually use, to make sense of our experiences, to navigate this crazy world that we live in.
And to connect with each other, too. Think about it. When we engage in these deep dives, whether it's history, science, philosophy, we're not just like memorizing facts. We're sharing perspectives. We're challenging each other's ideas.
Yeah.
And we're expanding our collective understanding.
Like we're building this community of lifelong learners, all committed to exploring these ideas together. And who knows what amazing insights we might uncover along the way, right?
That's the beauty of it. The journey is the destination. So to all our listeners out there, keep those minds sharp, keep those questions coming, and keep diving deep into, that world of knowledge.
And don't forget that 80-20 rule. Focus on those high-impact concepts, those gems of wisdom that are going to help you unlock those new levels of understanding. Until next time, happy learning, everyone.